Hi everyone and welcome back to Farrand Film, and this is the paper 2 video as part of this year's annual revision content. So if you're unaware, paper 2 this year for GCSE film studies is on Thursday the 21st of May. So you get about, I don't know, quick maths, you get about 12 days, couple of weeks between this paper and paper 1. So a pretty decent amount of time to sort of lead into it. My plan is I'm going to upload this probably similar time to paper 2, because I think historically where I've left it to more towards paper 2 to upload the video, people got a little bit frustrated because they were trying to try and revise both together and stuff like that. So I'm gonna stick this up as close to the first one as possible. Hopefully by now you've seen the first one. If you haven't done, maybe go back to that one. Make sure that you're revising maybe chronologically for these exams to come up, that you're not confusing yourselves between films that are going to come up on papers and stuff like that. So there are three questions. There are three films that are being assessed on this paper. So question one is your global English language film. Question two is your global non-English language film, and question three is your contemporary UK film. So let's look at that first question. So, the first question, global English language film. So your choices here are District 9, Jojo Rabbit, The Babadook, Slumdog Millionaire, and The Breadwinner. So for my students, we are doing Jojo Rabbit. I've taught District 9 and Slumdog Millionaire in the past, so I'll try my best to sort of allude to those as we go through. But questions that came up in the past, so you had a couple of character questions, you had narrative, climax, and film form a couple of years ago that came up as a bit of a big stickler that some people got struggle that found quite difficult. Mise-en-scene was the big question last year. They've not yet asked questions on narrative structures or narrative techniques, so we will maybe look at some of those just a little bit, just in case it comes up this year. So last year's question was identify a key setting or location in the film that you studied, describe the setting or location, briefly explain why you think the filmmakers chose to use this setting or location, and explore how mise-en-scene is used to create meaning in one key sequence from the film that you have studied. So we're going to look at these three first. We're going to look at A, B, and C first. Now, I did a little bit of a thing on the paper one video where I went through the shorter answer questions, where your 4 markers, your 3 markers, your 5 markers, because my students in particular, and a lot of students who have watched the videos and commented on the videos, find themselves struggling a little bit to answer those and to get enough marks. And I know how frustrating that can be because having marked some myself, oftentimes that's where students drop marks, and it's where they sort of not quite hitting a grade boundary because they've dropped marks on these ones instead, and it's quite difficult when it's being marked to really um, contextualize the difference between why someone's getting 3 marks and why someone's getting 4 marks. A lot of the times it comes down to the quality of the writing, it comes down to the confidence and the way in which you've written. Sometimes it can come down to something as simple as subject terminology, that you've essentially written the same thing as somebody else, but they've used a key term where you've not. So I'm going to try and allude to a little bit of that again on this video, and of course we're going to go through the structures for the 10 markers and the 15 markers, or in this case, just for this paper, just the 15 markers. So this question is all to do with setting and location. So again, it is a stepped question. Your answer must flow from 1A to 1C. So whatever you identify in 1A, you need to carry on through B and into C, and specificity is key. And for this paper, there is an additional 5 marker for two of the films. We never know as teachers, we never know which questions this additional 5 marker is going to come up for. It means that on one of the questions, on one of the films, you'll get a little bit of an easy ride because you lose 5 marks. You don't lose 5 marks. You basically get a 5 mark break. But on the other two, they will have this additional question. So two of the films will have A, B, C, and D, and one of them will have A, B, and C. We just don't know which ones. So if we're looking at this question, and again, I'm doing that thing that I did on the paper one video where I brought in some stuff from the mark scheme. So if we're looking at that question B, so that 4 marker, so briefly describe the location or the setting. So this says responses may include a description of props in the location or the setting and a description of a key place where the film is set. This may be a city, town, or specific place within this location. Now, some of the things, some of the command words I think here tend to throw students in terms of how much to write. Now, because this is saying briefly describe, at this point, you're not being asked to analyze. You're not being asked to sort of really dig down deep into what it means. You're just being asked to describe it. Just talk about it. Talk about the way that it looks. Talk about things that are included in it. Maybe start talking about why it's important, but it's not necessary at all. When we get into C, so this 5 marker, so C is briefly explain why you think the filmmakers chose. Now, the thing I love about film studies is that it's ambiguity and its openness of its questions. In that, briefly explain why you think the filmmakers chose to use this setting or location. No one's going to say, as long as you write confidently, that whatever you think is wrong. No one's going to say that your explanation of why you think the filmmakers chose that set and location is wrong, as long as you can confidently state why you think so and you can back it up. Okay? It's not about right or wrong in this one. So for this question, responses may cover how the setting or location contributes to the film as a whole, how the setting or location at the start acts as a point of contrast with other locations across the film. That's nice. What this setting or location implies about the lives of characters featured within the scene. Okay, so what it tells us about the film overall as a whole, how it might contrast with certain points in the film, and what it tells us about the characters. So I'm going to go through a little bit of a model answer, okay? Some sort of pointers first, though. So aim for as many points as there are marks available. So if there's 4 marks available, try and write 4 points. Some points may be more developed than others. Describe does not need deep analysis. Explain is the next step up, beginning to look deeper, as I've kind of already mentioned. So with this four marker, then let's have a look at this. So we're going to talk about Jojo's house in Jojo Rabbit. So Jojo's house is shown with everyday furniture such as a dining table, beds, cupboards, and it makes it feel like a normal family home. There are also Nazi items in the house, including propaganda posters and uniforms, which remind the audience of the time period. The house is warm in places, meaning its comfort and safety. But the attic where Elsa is hidden feels darker and more tense. Now, I've purposely, with that, gone back to what that mark scheme said about a contrast. And that little bit at the end about the house being warm in places, meaning comfort and safety, but the attic where Elsa is hidden is darker and more tense. That's a contrast, okay? And then I've spoken about what it looks like. So it's got, it's everyday furniture, it's a dining table, beds, cupboards. It feels like a normal family home. But there are Nazi items, which again links to the time frame. Okay, so it's basically a description. I've described it as a normal family home. It has things that remind us of the context, and in terms of a contrast, it can feel quite warm, but it's quite dark where Elsa is being hidden in the cupboard. Okay, pretty straightforward. Explain why you think the filmmakers chose to use this setting and location. So the filmmakers chose to use JoJo's home as the main setting to show how Nazism affected normal people in Germany during the war. By setting much of the film in a familiar space, the audience can see how these extreme views were normalized in society. The house also allows an important contrast between safety and danger, as it is meant to protect JoJo, but it is also where Elsa is secretly hidden. This makes the setting important for showing Jojo as his home becomes the place where he learns the truth about the Jewish people and begins to reject Nazi ideas. Now, what I've done there is a little bit of what a pitfall of what some students try and not do, and they freeze a little bit in an exam. The point that I've made about the house is also an important contrast between safety and danger, as it is meant to protect Jojo, but it's also where Elsa is secretly hidden, is a little bit repetitive of that last couple of points that I made for question B, or my answer for question B. That's not a bad thing. That's fine. And sometimes you might need to go back to points that you've made before and reiterate them, or go over and sort of deepen them a little bit, especially in these stepped questions. That's okay. You're not going to get marked down for doing that. Okay. So don't ever get to the point where you think, oh, I can't repeat myself because if I repeat myself, I'm just going to get marked down. Repeat yourself. Okay. You're not, I think the term marked down is very negative in that that kind of alludes to the fact that you're going to get docked marks. They're going to start taking marks away from you. You either will get a mark or you just won't get that mark. Okay, it's fine. You may as well write it anyway. Um, the thing that I put at the end about how Jojo's home becomes the place where he learns about Jewish people and begins to reject Nazi ideas. That's where you're digging a little bit deeper, okay? So this is only 1 mark more than the last question, and the last question was a very descriptive question. This is asking you to explain. So we're just digging a little bit deeper. We're bringing out that analysis just a little bit, ready for question D, okay? So question D. So explore how mise-en-scène is used to create meaning in one key sequence from the film that you've studied. Okay, so mise-en-scène, naturally, lovely thing to talk about and a great thing for you to be able to split into 3 paragraphs as needed for this 15 marker. Now, if this is your first time watching one of my videos and you've not watched the video for paper 1 yet, rule of thumb, when it comes to a question that's worth 5 or more marks, you want to be writing a paragraph per 5 marks. So all across this paper, your 15 markers at the end for every film, 3 paragraphs. Okay. Now for mise-en-scène, we can split that up into 3 areas. So topic sentence, as you can see on the screen, in Jojo Rabbit, costumes, props, and settings are used to create meaning in the scene where Jojo finds Rosie in the town square. Now, the way that I'd split this, again, costumes, props, and settings. Okay, 3 elements of mise-en-scène, a paragraph on each. So your first paragraph is costumes, your second paragraph is props, your third paragraph, which I'll read through to you now, is settings. So, third point I will discuss is settings. This is best seen when Jojo follows the butterfly in the large, open, public town square. This is important because the town square, usually being a normal public space, makes Rosie's death more shocking and disturbing. Okay, so we are talking. I've glossed over this completely. We're talking about the key sequence where Jojo discovers his mum Rosie being hung in the town square. As the audience, our emotional response is heightened as it makes the pressure of the regime feel authentic and unavoidable. This links to the historical context of Nazi Germany, where public executions were used to intimidate citizens and punish resistance. Okay, so your structure for that 5 marks, your point to what you're talking about, scene, where can it be seen in the film, wherever you found it from, important, why is it important, audience, what meaning does it create for the audience, and then genre or context, how do you link it back to the genre, or in this case, and across this paper actually, the contexts. Okay, contexts are really, really crucial for this paper, and you're probably naturally going to talk more about context on this paper than you do on paper 1. So that's your 5 marks. That's your sort of your first or your last paragraph, depending on how you look at it. Do the same 2 more times. You've got your 15 marks. You're done. You're out. Okay. So theme and issue. This is something that's come up on this question in the past. It's film specific and it's context driven, so it depends on the film that you are looking at, it can't be a sort of catch-all thing. I couldn't now just give you a theme and issue and say you need to talk about that no matter what film you study. Okay, it depends on the film that you've done. Film form can be split up into 4 areas, so you can be cinematography, mise-en-scène, sound, or editing. So if you get a question that is nice enough to say to you, discuss how film form is used at the end of your film, you can split that into cinematography, editing, sound. You can split that into editing, sound, mise-en-scène. Okay, however many you want. All right, just 3 variations of that film form. Okay. Key sequences are exactly that. I went on a bit of a tangent on paper 1 about these key sequences. You need to pick a scene that's relevant to the question. Now, again, just to sort of reiterate it, but shrink it down a little bit. As a teacher, I will show my classes 3 or 4 key scenes. Okay, those 3 or 4 key scenes probably equate to around about 20 minutes of the film's entire runtime. Jojo Rabbit, being a film that I teach, is around about 2 hours long. I'm not going to show them the entire film over and over and over again. I show my classes every film that we study twice. I show it them initially before I teach them anything, and then I teach them about context. I teach them about, in case of Jojo Rabbit, we go through some narrative stuff relating to Jojo in the film, and then I show them the film again. The idea being that the second time that they watch the film, at that point, they've got all the knowledge in their heads and they know what they're looking for and they know what they're trying to pick out. Now, after that, when we do a bit of key sequence analysis, we will look at key scenes, and that's all that it is. It's key scenes, and it's the opening and the closing of every film. They're the 2 that I tend to stick to, and then I pick out just another scene. The Gestapo scene in JoJo is really good to do. The Rosie being hung scene is really good to do because as grim as it is a really important scene, especially when it comes to color palettes. The colour sort of washes away from the film at that point when Jojo finds his mum. The sound's really good in that scene as well. So again, if you were getting a question about film form and how it creates meaning in a key scene, that would be a good one to do for Jojo Rabbit. So when they talk about key scenes, what they're essentially saying is any scene from the film, you can talk about any moment of the film, but what the exam board are assessing is your ability to know that that scene is key to the thing that you are talking about. When it comes to narrative techniques, just because this hasn't come up for this question before, so narrative specific questions need to focus on how the story's been told. So how have we been told the story of Jojo Rabbit, for example? How have we been told the story of Slumdog Millionaire? Now, all of the films that are a part of this question all do it in different ways. So District 9 does it in terms of reportage style filmmaking. It uses a technique called in media res, which is basically throwing us in while the action is already taking place and expecting us to understand what's going on around the film at that point and picking it up quite straight away. You might have a non-linear structure. Jojo Rabbit has a very unreliable narrator, even though we all like Jojo. He is fundamentally indoctrinated into the Nazi regime. He thinks Hitler is the best thing since sliced bread. But we need to treat him as an unreliable narrator. He doesn't know exactly what's going on. There's a lot of Chekhov's gun. There's this idea of showing us something, but then we are going to come back to it. Rose's shoelaces being a key thing with that. There's a lot of withholding. We don't know the truth about Nathan, Elsa's boyfriend. We don't know Captain K's personal motivations. We don't know the whole plan for Germany, or at least Jojo doesn't, because we see it through Jojo's eyes. I've put some more on the screen for other films that are a part of this question. But having those in the back of your mind, knowing what kind of narrative techniques are going on for this question is really key and really crucial because I think the nicer questions that have been asked in the past about your global English language film have always been related to character, and I think students naturally find them quite easy to talk about when they are asking about a character. But if it asks you about narrative structures, narrative techniques, they feel like two really big, heavy words that when you get into an exam and you see that on a piece of paper, you freeze and you go, "Oh my days, what is one of those?" Same like genre conventions that I mentioned on the first video. So having them in the back of your mind, having them as your sort of key ones to go in with, expecting that almost. But then when you get to the question, if it's not that and it's a nice character question, you ease off a little bit. If it is that, you're ready and raring to go. Okay. If it isn't and it is a character one and you've got it in the back of your mind, still mention it anyway. Get your marks, get extra points, right? Show them how smart you are. So, question two, your global non-English language film. So this is Sotsi, The Farewell, The Wave, Girlhood, and Wajda. Now this is flitting a lot between age, gender, ethnicity, and culture. Now, when when I teach representation, I discuss things like age, and I discuss gender, and I discuss ethnicity and culture, but I also mention disability and sexuality. But realistically, they aren't going to come up um, for any film on the paper off of this question unless all the films have, for example, a disabled character in them, or a character who is homosexual in them, or transsexual in them, where basically unless it's something that's widespread and across the board in terms of the films that are on offer, it's not going to come up as a question. And right now, not all of these films feature a disabled character. Not all of these feature a non-heterosexual character. So I can't imagine that the question's going to come up this year for you to talk about disability or sexuality. Okay. I would imagine, to be perfectly honest, that it's going to be an age question, whether it's old people or young people, because it's not been asked in a couple of years, and they tend to go between the two, either age or gender, because it was ethnicity or culture last year, and arguably, and I'm speaking for my students here, we like to talk about age or gender. They are naturally the ones that they latch onto a little bit and find a bit easier rather than ethnicity and culture. But we'll go through this now. So last year's questions, this was the A, B, and C, so this is the one where you were missing that five marker. So we're just going to focus on these first two, so your A and B for now. So a set question, as always, specificity is key. So identify one key character from your chosen film. Now, guys, If you're studying SOTC and the name of the film is SOTC and you manage to get this question wrong, what are you doing? Okay, right, come on, simple. I say the same thing for when my students do a question like this, a Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Okay, that come on, you can answer this question. That's the easiest mark you're ever going to get in your life. Um, then it gets a little trickier when it gets to briefly explain this character's ethnicity and or cultural identity. This tripped so many people up last year. So there was nothing on the mark scheme regarding indicative content for this. There was a little bit around about what people might discuss in terms of what we mean by an ethnicity and what we mean by a cultural identity, but linked to the 15 marker. So I'm going to come to that in a little bit. So this is how my advice would be to approach this type of question. Should it come up in the future, and should you be revising this now? Because again, just to make this really, really clear, yes, these are last year's questions, and you might think, why, what is the point of us going through last year's questions? If you get a question on age, um, and I mention something now about the fact that Tim is young in the wave, that's your point for your age question. You just word it slightly differently. If I mention something to do with Tim's gender, and the question this year is on gender, again, you just flip it. Okay. So, just to kind of approach this question. So, one key character from the wave is Tim. Now, I've put that in because I tell my students, whether other teachers and anyone who maybe been an examiner watching this agree, that for a one marker, you can get away with just writing a character's name. Okay, that you could write Tim and get out of there, and you'd get a mark for it. But I know that even some students like to do the thing of saying one key character from this film is Tim. So however way you prefer it, okay, if it's one mark, I think you get away with just writing the character's name. But if you want to stick it in a sentence, you go ahead, you stick it in a sentence. So, Tim is a white teenager living in Germany. His cultural identity is the same as his classmates. He's living in Germany after World War II. Tim feels isolated in school and doesn't fit in, which makes him become obsessed with the wave. Tim's indoctrination in the wave shows how easily individuals in German society can become influenced by a dictatorship. Okay, now again, this is a briefly explained question. So what I've done there is I've explained that Tim is a white teenager living in Germany, that his cultural identity is the same as his classmates. They're all living in Germany after World War II. Um, but Tim feels isolated, and it makes him become obsessed with the wave, which doesn't really link to his ethnicity or his cultural identity, but what that does is that does show us actually that he can be quite easily influenced, and it shows us the overall, I suppose, message of the film about how Wenger's point on students in Germany believing that not believing that a dictatorship could take hold again is proven right because they get obsessed with the wave. So that kind of wraps all that up for that four marker. And again, like if you wanted to go down the route of using the structure that we use for the five markers and the 10 and the 15s, and go down the route of say doing your point, your important, your scene, your audience, you can do that to sort of get to those four marks. Onto the 15 marker for this question. So discuss the representation of ethnicity and or cultural identity in the film that you have studied. Now, a lot of students found this difficult last year and found it difficult when I provided this as a mock exam paper for my class this year about what really ethnicity and cultural identity is. So one thing that I wanted to mention, and this was mentioned in the mark scheme. So again, you're splitting your 15 marks into three. Now, cultural identity can encompass youth culture, student culture, and stereotypes. It doesn't have to rely extensively on locations, on religions, on regions and locality and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily just have to be about the fact that they're all German in this case for the wave, okay? You can talk about the fact that they are students and student culture. You can talk about youth culture. You can talk about stereotypes, okay? You're almost getting into gender stuff at that point. But again, that's part of the identity or the cultural identity. So this is the thing that came up on the mark scheme in terms of indicative content. So this is what the ethnicity and/or cultural identity is, how the characters reflect their ethnicity and cultural identity, how film form is used to convey it, whether stereotypes are Adam can't speak today, perpetuated or disproved. Yep. The contrast between the representations of ethnicities and our cultural identity. There is no requirement for candidates to consider all aspects of film form, and candidates may choose to highlight one aspect or deal with several aspects. In The Wave, the cultural identity is represented through the sense of belonging, German history, and excluding outsiders. So I've done the second paragraph for this one. So the second point I will discuss is German history and how it positions modern society. This is seen early in the film when students say that another dictatorship would be impossible in Germany today. This is important because it shows confidence in democracy and denial about the risks of autocracy. As an audience, we are encouraged to question this as the students become indoctrinated. This links to Germany's post-World War II identity, where education strongly rejects fascism and promotes the democratic values. Okay, so that basically discusses the idea of cultural identity and German history at that point. Now, to talk about questions that have come up in the past, okay? So the best thing to do in terms of a response to an age question or a gender question or even a culture and ethnicity question is to anchor your response with the contexts and then address the element in question. So find three key contextual pieces of learning from your film, so three key contexts that surround the film, and then sort of bend it to the question. So, for example, the non-diegetic Kwaito music in Sotsi can signify the ethnicity or culture. It can also reflect the age of the gang, and it's a piece of film form that can be considered a motif of people and places. Um, so things like in the wave, for example, group identity, fascism, authoritarianism, abuse of power. In girlhood, you've got identity, female empowerment, and social inequality and race. The farewell has family and tradition. It has culture clashes. It has morals. It has moral discussion. Sotzi has redemption, poverty, post-apartheid, and Wajda has gender roles, tradition, and rebellion. Okay, so these are all things that you can use and then just tweak. So, like in Wajda, for example, the rebellion can be seen as it's a gender rebellion. It could also be seen that it's an age rebellion. It could be, and it definitely is a rebellion against culture at that point. Okay, at which point you can then bring in the discussion on tradition. So there's a lot of things that you can talk about, and you've just got to be very clever in the way that you manage to bend that to the question. Okay, and as I mentioned before, I'm not necessarily going to say to you this is what I wholeheartedly think is going to be on this paper this year, but I would be very surprised if it was something other than age or gender, because it seems like this is the way that it's going to go this year. Okay. So your final question, your contemporary UK film. So Skyfall, Attack the Block, Rocks, Blinded by the Light, and Submarine. Now, typically this is a question that asks you to talk about the way that a film looks, the style of a film, and typically cinematography, color, lighting, mise-en-scene, stuff like that. So last year you were asked to discuss the visual style of the film and how typical it is of your overall film style. And again, we're going to talk about these three key points here. So your question A, B, and C. So one, identify one visually distinctive scene. Describe what makes a scene visually distinctive. Briefly explain how lighting and color are used to create meaning. So again, this is a stepped question. So I'm going to give you model answers for this one. So one visually distinctive scene in Skyfall is Shanghai. So that again would get you the mark. Again, if you wanted to, I'd give you the mark for just saying Shanghai. Maybe other people wouldn't. Describe what makes this scene visually distinctive. So the Shanghai scene is visually distinctive because it uses a dark setting with large windows overlooking the city. The scene is dominated by bright blue lights which contrast the black silhouettes of Bond and the assassin. The use of reflections in the glass make the fight feel stylized and visually distinctive. The city skyline helps the scene stand out from other action sequences in the film. Now, this is very similar to the question on JoJo. the first question, where you were asked to briefly describe. Okay, all I've done here is I've described it. Okay, so Shanghai is visually distinctive because it uses a dark setting with large windows and it overlooks the city. It's dominated by bright blue lights, contrasting with black silhouettes. The use of reflections in the glass make the fight feel stylized and visually distinctive. The city skyline helps it stand out. So I've just had to think about four ways in how I can describe that scene. Okay. And again, like some of you might be looking at this and think, I don't know if I can think of four ways. Think of three, get 3 marks, okay? But try and go for four, especially for these 4 markers. For your 5 markers, I'll briefly explain how lighting and colour are used to create meaning. So lighting and colour are used to present the world of espionage as cold and dangerous. The blue lighting creates a cold, emotionless atmosphere, suggesting Bond, suggesting to Bond, suggesting that the I don't know what I've written there, but suggesting that the mission is to Bond's dislike. The characters are shown mostly as silhouettes, which represents how assassins are anonymous and expendable. The contrast between the bright city lights and the dark shadows suggests the hidden nature of Bond's mission, and the use of colour and lighting reinforces the idea that Bond is a professional killer working in a morally unclear world. Okay, so this idea that again Bond doesn't like it, so it's all covered in blue. What the silhouettes represent. Okay, it's very sort of common garden, common ground sort of analysis at this point. Okay, it's basically, this is what it is. This is what I've seen. This is what it means. Okay, what have you seen? What does it mean? What have you seen? What does it mean? All right. You're not digging too far deep into your analysis because that's for your 15 marker. So in your 15 marker, explore how the visual style of the film is typical of the film's visual style overall. Now, I want to mention this just because the exam board love the word typical. Okay. Now, what they mean by typical is how much is it expected of what else is to come. Okay. So specifically for this question. So how far is the visual style of this scene typical of the film's visual style overall? So how much of Shanghai, for the question I've just given you, how much of Shanghai is similar to the rest of the film? Okay, and it might be all of it, it might be none of it, it might be some of it, right? But if it's some of it, going back to what I said on the paper one thing, duality, not just a Slipknot song. Okay, say it is, say it isn't, say it is, say it isn't. Show that maturity of your answer. Show that maturity of your conversation. So, in Skyfall, the visual style of the Shanghai skyscraper scene is mostly typical of the style of the rest of the film. Mostly typical. Now, the way that I'd split this into three then at that point is your first paragraph, talk about the use of lighting and colour, right? And then talk about how it is typical of other scenes, and then say how it's different from other scenes. So then what you're doing is you're saying, this is the lighting and colour that we expect to see. This is how Shanghai is similar to other scenes. This is how Shanghai is different to other scenes. So I'm going to focus on that last one, okay? Because sometimes I think students find it easy to say, oh, this is how it's the same. Trust me, this is how it's the same. But then when they're forcing themselves to look at the flip side of the coin, the other side of the coin, and go, well, how is it different then at that point? They struggle with that because I think sometimes naturally, as human beings, we find the point and we sort of reiterate that point. But once you've latched onto a point, having the maturity to go, oh, actually, I can see the other side of it. That's the duality. Okay, that's something that for any of you who are watching this who are revising for your GCSEs and are looking forward to doing A level, that's something that I try and hone in on at A level. In the duality of going, this is one hand, this is what one person thinks, but then this is what another person thinks. Okay, and then being able to validate which one you think is best. So. Paragraph 3. The third point I will discuss is how the style in Shanghai differs from the other scenes in the film. This is best seen when comparing Shanghai to the finale sequence in Skyfall. So what we're doing here is we're not just mentioning a scene, we're mentioning two scenes and saying how they're different. This is important because it shows a shift from modern visual style to a more emotional one as Bond reconnects with his past. As the audience, we feel a stronger emotional connection to Bond during Skyfall scenes than we do in Shanghai. This links to the filmmaker's intention to modernize Bond while still exploring his background and his identity. So the whole thing with Skyfall, for those of you that don't study it, is there are two main colours in Skyfall. There's blue and there's orange. Blue represents modern digital technology and a new world of espionage that Bond isn't familiar with. Whereas orange, it represents the sort of homely, warm, old school espionage that he loves and that he prefers. Now, Shanghai is coated in these neon electric blues, okay? And it's Bond's first mission back after his resurrection. He's out of his depth, literally. Blue, covered in blue, he's out of his depth, okay? When you get to Skyfall, which essentially is where we go, James Bond meets Home Alone, um, he likes that. He likes that stuff. He likes the raw, tangible physicality of it. So it's coated in an orange hue. Okay. Now, at that point, this links to the context of the film because what they wanted to do with the context of the film is they wanted to, whilst, because this was the 50th anniversary of Bond, don't forget, whilst on the one hand, you go, look at where Bond's been. Let's respect this past. We want to go where, but we want to push him into the future as well. Okay. So it's the juxtaposition and the collaboration of the two at that point. So that's why it's different to the rest of the film. So, being able to refer to some form of duality shows a level of maturity, confidence, and cine literacy. If a question asks you to explore a certain element or area, consider not just your own personal response to it, but also how others may view the same thing, how they might have a different response. This creates an empathetic answer which lies strongly within band 5 or excellent responses and begins to show an A-level standard of engagement. Now, this isn't just for this question. This is for any question across both papers. That if you are able to bring a point to the table, but then not just bring that point to the table, but then also say, actually, that might be how one person feels, but another person may feel this way. That's such an emotional, mature response that you can bring to a GCSE exam paper. And that if you find yourself confident and capable enough to do that, do it because you're going to get rewarded with really high marks for doing it. So that's it for paper two. Okay. I said something similar at the end of the paper one video, but genuinely, if there is anything else that you need that you think would be useful for me to go over in a video or a quick thing, or even if I put it up as a short on YouTube or I stick it on TikTok or whatever it is, let me know. Okay, if there's a more detailed going through of a question that you want me to do, let me know. Okay. Whether it's paper one, whether it's paper two, whatever you need. Teachers, if you need me to sort of go over something again, by all means, okay? This channel now, because I've been doing this for a couple of years now, is full of videos like this where I go through full papers, okay? So go back to last year's video. I might have said something really intelligent in last year's video that I forgot to say in this one. At the same time, I might have rambled on like a madman. Go back to all the individual ones for specific films. When it comes to revising the timeline for paper one, go back to that video as well. They are scattered all over this YouTube channel. I think there's not many in between. Okay, they're really easy to find, really easy to search up, and there should be a playlist that goes through revision as well. But if there is anything else at all that you need, please, please, please do not hesitate to comment and let me know. And I'll do the best that I can to make sure that I get this out for you, in the midst of getting my own class through as well. So. Best of luck with everything. Teachers, best of luck as well. Okay. I mentioned this at the end of the last one, but I'm going to say it again here. I'm recording this the day before we go back into the May half term, which is going to be bonkers. Um, yeah, best of luck. If you need anything, let me know. But you're fine. You've got this. You're going into this exam. You're proving to the examiners that you know what you're talking about. You're having the confidence of your ability, and you're going to make sure that you write everything you can do, and you're going to make sure that you answer every single question. You're not going to leave anything blank. Okay. Best of luck. See you soon.